Good morning, space travelers. It's Mrs. Badman from the Citizenship Academy. And today, we are going to dive into Lesson 2, which talks all about our solar system. So, let's go. Remember yesterday, we talked about how there are 5 different characteristics that make a planet able to be a planet. Well, we're going to review those really quickly before we get into our reading so we can remember and things will click. So, the first thing is it has to be a sphere with a large mass. Now, when I say a sphere, I want you to think about like a dodgeball or a softball, baseball, soccer ball. They all things they have in common. They're round balls that you can catch, right? You can hold. But a planet, they can't be like, here you go, and someone tosses you a planet, right? It wouldn't work like that. A planet has to have a really large mass, something so huge, right? I mean, think about the Earth. How many people live on the Earth? It's a big old planet. So it has to be round, right? It has to be round. If you think about all the planets, we're going to talk about more of them, they're all big round objects. So now, the second characteristic is that this planet has to orbit around a star in an elliptical path. Now look at this picture right here. See how the center is the sun? Well, remember, the sun is a star. So in this case, each of these planets move around the sun in an elliptical pathway. Now the third characteristic, again, this picture is not from space, but it does help us prove a really good point, is that these planets have to have cleared away every other planet, or cleared away any other objects in its path. So each planet has a very specific path that it goes around the sun. Some are closer to the sun, some are farther away. But in order to have its own path, it has to clear away everything in its way. Oftentimes that leaves a lot of debris. And that's actually one of the words we're going to be talking about a little bit later, but it's really important to know that they have to have a clear path. It has to go around and around and around because it can't go in a circle if there's something in its path, right? It might get bunked around or something like that, right? So it has to have a very clear path with nothing in its way. Now, the fourth different characteristic is it has to be mostly made of rock and gas or a combination of the two of those. So now when you think about Earth, we've got rock and gas, like gas in our atmosphere. Rock, like our different continents that we have. Now some planets are mostly rock and some are mostly gaseous planets. Now, today we're going to focus on those kind of planets and you'll kind of see where they have a little bit of divide and where you can kind of characterize them into different groups. So we're going to talk about that in our reading today. But the fifth and final characteristic is that the planet does not make its own light. So Earth is not putting off light into space, right? It's not putting off light. Now we get light on Earth, like the sun and the moon at night, because of the star that it's orbiting, in our case, the sun. So the sun is a direct light, right? When it's morning time, afternoon, it's a direct light, and oftentimes it's sunny, unless you live, in Syracuse, where it's kind of cloudy a lot of the times. But the sun is still coming through. Now, at night, when the moon comes up, we sometimes think, wow, that moon is really bright. It is bright, but that is not the light from the moon. That is actually the light from the sun reflecting off the moon and then coming back into our eyeballs. So the light from the moon is not actually made on the moon. It's actually a reflection of the sun. But again, getting back to it, Earth is not putting out its own light. It's a lot like the moon where it's a rock, right? So it's not putting off any light. And that is a really big characteristic of what makes a planet a planet. Now, before we get into it too, we have some really cool new words that are going to help you guys understand the reading a little bit better today. The first word we are going to hear is a celestial body. Now, when I say celestial body, you can think of anything in space, including planets, moons, stars, comets, meteors, asteroids, any of those things. It just has to be found in outer space. Right? So we couldn't say a tree because that's not in outer space. That's on our planet Earth. So it has to be found in our outer space planet systems. So that would be things like, constellations, those stars up there. Those are celestial bodies. So we're going to talk about that more in our reading today. Now, the second word that we're going to talk about is core. Now, that means the central, the inside part of a celestial body, so it's made from space. Any other objects, like an apple, right? I mean, you hear that term all the time, an apple core. It's the center of it. It's with the seeds. It's the very center of the apple. Now, a lot of times some people will say your core idea. And that is just your central idea, something that you really truly believe in and is the center of things that you stand for. So like our other people matter mindset, that's one of the cores of our school. It's an important, essential part, the inside of our school, what makes it great, makes it beautiful and big, right? Same with our earth, like in this picture. If you were to cut the earth in half, this is what would be on the inside. It's a really hot, super, 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 super hot center of our planet. And most of the time we don't think about the inside of our earth, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm really excited about that. But when we talk about core today, we are going to be talking about the inside of these planets. Now, I mentioned this word earlier, and that's the word debris. And debris is just a leftover bits. So it's like the space stuff. So when a meteorite hits, part of a planet, could be the moon, right? It's going to hit it, and that contact with it is going to kind of blow away parts of the moon, right? And since the moon is a rock, that's going to hit lots of dust and everything all over space. So when we say debris, I want you to think of the space dust, all that's left over from planets colliding, meteorites, asteroids, all those things combining together, hitting one another and creating all this dust in space. Now, the last word that we're going to talk about is meteoroids. Meteoroids are small pieces of metal or rock that travel through the solar system and that are much smaller than an asteroid. Now, they're still pretty big, right? But they're not going to do as much damage as an asteroid will. And if you guys ever heard about different things like, the asteroid, you can find meteorites and asteroids on planet Earth because they've just come and they've hit it and they have been there. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that too. But a meteoroid is just a small piece of metal or rock that's just been kind of floating around in space for a while. So we'll kind of get a little bit of a better look at that later on with our readings between Mrs. Tranjo and myself. We're going to get you guys up to snuff and figure out what a meteoroid is and what all these different things are. So, where do we live? Now, we talked about yesterday what our space address is. And they said, what if an alien came to talk to you and said, where do you live? Well, this is what we would tell them, right? Well, I did this for our school. I gave us our school space address. So now if we were to be writing to our school, we would be writing it on an envelope. And each of these lines is going to be where you would write and address your envelope to. So our school name is the Citizenship Academy, right? You could even make it longer, the Syracuse Academy of Sciences and Citizenship Academy. You can make it long, but I wanted to put the Citizenship Academy so we knew where we were. Now, our school name and street is on 301 Valley Drive. So that's the next line. Then our town and city is Syracuse. Our city is Syracuse. And we're in New York, and our zip code, which really helps us to know which part or which city we're in, is 13207. Now, under that, we'd put what country we're in. We are in the United States of America. Sometimes we use an abbreviation to put USA. That's fine. And then the last part of our space address is Earth. Now, we're going to keep going on our big space address adventure. But right now, I want you guys to think about that. Because that's going to start out at the beginning of our reading. They're going to talk about what a space address is. So I want you guys to actually see what it looked like before we got into the reading. So I think it's time for us to get going with our reading.